going to start the first session now, which is about building knowledge. So hopefully to address some of the needs that you've just highlighted there. So understanding hoarding and strategies to address and support people, and a little bit around some of the resources that are available too. I'm going to start with looking at what hoarding and challenges maintaining a healthy home are. So hoarding is can be a diagnosed mental health disorder, and it's connected to challenges with acquiring, sorting and or discarding items or animals. So it might be a whole combination of those behaviours, or it might be one of those behaviours. One of the key features of hoarding behaviour is attaching significant meaning to items or animals, which impedes the ability to discard. So they might be attaching meaning that you and I perhaps wouldn't, and that particularly the collection of the items and animals is leading to a cluttered environment that's impeding the functioning of the living spaces and is impacting on health and safety. So it might be that it's becoming problematic to create entry and exit point. It might be that it's problematic to move around the living environment, maintaining somewhere to sleep, maintaining somewhere to cook, maintaining somewhere to toilet. Common characteristics of hoarding can include having a family history of hoarding disorder. That's fairly common for this to be intergenerational. It may be that a person has fixed beliefs about not wasting objects. As we said, there's an emotional attachment to those items or animals. There's usually an element of challenges processing information, which is why the sorting and discarding can be particularly challenging for this group. And also there can be elements of emotional dysregulation too. Common co-present challenges include a history of trauma, loss or grief, and that can be childhood trauma, or it could be a loss or grief in adulthood, such as losing a partner or a child, that really triggers an attachment to items and animals over humans. And then there may be co-present mental health challenges from childhood through to adulthood, which may include anxiety and depression and issues with executive functioning, like memory loss, disordered thinking, that may get exacerbated as that person ages. So if dementia kicks in, or physical frailty, that of course makes it harder to think about sorting and discarding. Challenges maintaining a healthy home is a very long way of saying what you may be familiar with, squalor, or which is really a description of an environment, an unsanitary environment. So this is really describing an accumulation of rubbish or decomposing food or excessive grime, dust or mould, that may again make the living environment difficult to use, or may be creating health and safety issues for inhabitants. And again, challenges maintaining a healthy home are often co-present with other challenges, and that may include use of alcohol or drugs. It may include problems with executive functioning. It may include Alzheimer's, particularly those without hoarding disorder. And for those with hoarding disorder, the loss of a domestic partner can often trigger issues with squalor. The onset of frailty may make it more difficult to keep an environment more healthy, or neurocognitive disorders. So again, it can be that you can have clients who are presenting with very complex issues to address. And of course, just to point out, hoarding and squalor may be present together, but they don't have to be. So you may it's quite common to see people who live with hoarding who don't have issues with maintaining a healthy home. You may see issues with maintaining a healthy home and no presence of hoarding. And in those cases, you're dealing with slightly different challenges. So the important thing with saying this is that for you as professionals, it's important to understand people's stories, and their health histories. So how have they come to where they are? What are the triggers that have led to attachment to items? What are the physical capacities that you need to consider? What might be health-related issues that so that you look at the root cause of hoarding or challenges maintaining a healthy home, as well as the presenting environmental issues. So why is this important for Tasmania? Well, a number of reasons. We don't know how many people are living with hoarding behaviour in Tasmania because we don't collect statistics. Internationally, it's estimated that about 2.5 of the adult population live with hoarding behaviour. So that would put that at about just over 5,000 older Tasmanians, so 5,000 Tasmanians aged 50 plus, or potentially nearly 9,000 Tasmanians if you're looking at those aged 20 plus. So that's a significant number. And also there are many personal costs and community costs for those living with hoarding. The personal costs obviously include poor and declining often mental and physical health. There's often present self-criticism and shame for people living with hoarding behaviour because they're very often judged rather than supported, and that there can often be a great deal of financial strain if acquiring items is a particular issue. Increased the focus on stigma can also mean that people living with hoarding are unlikely to seek support. So they're often quite isolated as individuals or family, and it can lead to quite strained family relationships if different members have different relationships to their living environments. Environmental costs include increased risks of injuries and falls, reduced access for services to enter the property to provide supports, and reduced access for emergency services. And for those who are renting, housing insecurity is often a big challenge too. And where animals are part of collections, the risk of infectious diseases is higher. It often leads to poor health and nutrition and premature death for the animals involved. And it's noted that there's particular stress and trauma amongst animal welfare staff in this area. So the personal and community costs are significant. And there's also an economic cost of not intervening in this space. So it's been estimated that the cost of a critical intervention when someone living with hoarding behaviour needs support through either a hospitalisation and a need to cease the environment for discharge, or whether it's transfer to residential care or a tenancy risk. The critical care costs is estimated at nearly 57,000 per household when that happens. Now that's a significant amount that could easily be more astutely used for supports that work on a preventative and an early intervention level. So some of the work we've been doing at Anglicare is looking at how can we switch those costs from critical care costs into a more preventative and early intervention space to help Tasmanians living with hoarding disorder. So yes, here at SARC, we've undertaken a 2-year project called Treasures Lives, which has particularly looked at how older Tasmanians living with hoarding behaviour can be supported to age well at home. And we've done that by working with families and carers, and also the range of service providers and statutory agencies who will work with or encounter people living with hoarding behaviour. And we've also looked at what works internationally. So we've been looking in North America, in other Australian jurisdictions, and in the UK. So we can really sort of think about what might work here if we draw on good practice and what the needs are that have been identified. And just to give you a little taste of that, families and carers in Tasmania are really the gateways to trust and support here, where they're present, of course. So we've really found that it's really important to consider and acknowledge the needs of families and carers. They have three very big roles. They're often the window on the world for their loved ones who are living with hoarding behaviour. They may be one of the only visitors to the home. They may be navigating that stigma of family and community relationships that their loved one is encountering. They have excellent insights into those stories and those triggers and the boundaries, the acceptable boundaries for interacting with their loved ones. And also they are often working with their loved ones to maintain trust and privacy, because they want to maintain a relationship, and their loved ones' privacy and trust is the key to that. They're very often focused on maintaining health and safety first for their loved ones, so making sure that the exits aren't blocked, making sure that there's somewhere to sleep, to eat, and to toilet. And they're often doing that alone because of the lack of services in Tasmania, and secondly because their loved ones are often reluctant to let others into the household. And they're often doing all this with a significant degree of emotional stress. So being worried about the environmental, personal and social risks that their loved ones are in, and often not seeking support for their own needs. So one of the things we have highlighted in the research is that when we're thinking about preventative and early intervention support in this space, we need to consider the needs of families and carers as families and carers, as well as the needs of those living with hoarding behaviour. So the supports that we've recommended really cover both spaces. We talk to service providers and agencies across almost every possible type of service that you can think of in Tasmania. The social care sector, emergency services, animal welfare, environmental health, absolutely, because services will encounter people living with hoarding through very different circumstances. And there were three main themes really in what service providers and agencies told us. Firstly, they talked about not having the time to support those they encounter with hoarding behaviour. And when they're talking about that, they were talking about having the time to understand those stories so that they could really build trust and rapport with those they were working with, that they could assess the risks and needs of their clients, and also work out goals with their clients that facilitate dignity of choice and risk for them. So that takes time, and it takes an understanding of that backstory as well as the presenting risks and challenges. They also told us that because there are no specialist services in Tasmania to support people living with hoarding, this is an issue where they see a lot of families living with hoarding behaviour, but this seems to be everybody's problem. They all have clients, but it's nobody's responsibility. There's nowhere to turn to for specialist support across the clinical space, the social, psychosocial space, and the practical space here. So they're holding clients. They don't want to let go of the relationship because that's such an important thing to win and maintain, but they can't actually support them effectively. And those that are working in the crisis space, so those that are working fire safety or tenancy support or health services, hospitalisations, animal welfare, environmental health, they are encountering a lot of families. But they're not focused necessarily on the person, they're focused on another issue of concern, usually an issue of compliance, like environmental health or animal welfare. And they have no way of easily contacting social care providers that can work with them to address the people issues as well as the animal and the property issues. So they're very conscious that they need a pathway from those crisis or compliance issues into positive engagements for the residents they're encountering. And the third issue that we need to address here really is that a lot of service providers can't enter the home of clients they encounter because of their organisation's health and safety risk tolerances. So they can't actually step across the house threshold. So that's a real problem. They're holding clients without actually being able to enter the home. And the third issue that he told us was that they're not prepared for this. So there's no information hub here to sort of to go to say these services can help you. This is who you can partner with. This is where you can get training and workforce development. There are no common assessment tools. So there are no tools across different services that say this is the level of concern that we have around the clutter in the household, and this should trigger this sort of response. There's no common approach to that. And we don't collect the data, so there's no way of understanding what the significance of the issue is here. And as I mentioned, there are clearly opportunities for engagement. So even though this is a group that is often not a help-seeking group, they are most commonly encountered through critical instances such as hospitalisation, through fires, through neighbourhood complaints, animal welfare concerns, tenancy risks. These are moments of contemplation and triggers for action. But because these are mainly negative or forced engagements with services, we need ways to turn these into positive engagements. So ensure that our compliance and statutory services have a way to link to social care providers so that we can provide a holistic response and support response for people who are encountering hoarding behaviours. So what works? How do we make that happen here? So internationally, there are three elements really to what you need to put together for a system to work to support those living with hoarding behaviours. The first thing is that you need a targeted policy and legislative framework, and you need a policy framework that sees hoarding behaviour and squalor as a complex community policy issue. So not just a mental health issue, not just an environmental health issue, not just a problem, but understand that it needs a holistic response that brings together services that will support people, animals, and property and environment in a very focused and consolidated way. And to do that, you need a lead government agency who's going to convene that collective approach, bring together all of those services in a funded and resourced way. The second element you need is resourced collaboration and specialist programs for families. So successful models bring together all of those services with two goals. One goal is around a chronic illness management model, so understanding and addressing the mental health concerns, trauma, and which will really work on a client's self-care and in a therapeutic way, but also have a collective goal that is around harm minimisation. So what we're trying to achieve there is, as it says here, to manage and mitigate the negative impacts rather than to eradicate the hoarding behaviour entirely. We're not aiming to eradicate hoarding behaviour here. It's around keeping individuals safe and ensuring that they're well. So the models that work best have those as the key goals in their supports for families and individuals. And then you need a common practice framework which addresses some of the concerns we've had here around we don't know where to turn to. So there needs to be a shared understanding of what hoarding behaviour and squalor are, understanding those goals, and then having a shared structure to work for working. And that includes having the shared assessment tools such as the clutter image rating scale that we'll come on to later, or the environmental health index, having a common understanding of the severity of an issue, which might trigger a response across your collective service base, have a common and have an information hub which shares this practice framework, but also lists the services that are available in the area, and also acts as an information point for families and the public too. So in terms of what that looks like, really, as a specialist and mainstream support group or network, you've got a central goal of harm minimisation, wellness and reablement, person-centred care, which has a specialist case management function where services can be referred into, and then a series of supports that can be drawn on for that individual. Then there needs to be, within that, clinical supports which will address any therapeutic and psychological needs there. There needs to be cognitive rehabilitation and cognitive behavioural therapy, which will address any behavioural change that the individual wants to work on, and that's the important thing. Obviously, it's got to be a shared goal. So if a client wants to work on sorting certain items, then the cognitive and behavioural therapy can work on how that can happen, and then in the home practice. So there has to be that element of cognitive rehabilitation and CBT, and particularly rehabilitation if it's an older client, because in order to do CBT, you have to have the cognitive capacity to change. So if you're working with older clients, there's got to be some cognitive rehabilitation first, often, before you can engage with the CBT. The psychosocial supports, which will practice these approaches in home and also think about social connection in community. Peer supports are really important in this space for families and for individuals to start to work on normalising this issue. So understanding that you are not alone, there are other people who you can draw on for support as well, and start that destigmatisation for families. And then in-home personal care and domestic support. And of course, this may be surrounded by other issues that might be to do with animal welfare and also environmental health. So what we've, so for the research, we've recommended a system that contains these elements for Tasmania. So what we've recommended is that we need to develop that policy and practice framework with a lead government agency, and we need a positive community education campaign to destigmatise. And then we need regional collaboration and services on that model that we've just talked about. So a professional, multidisciplinary professional network in each region with local case management, specialist clinical and psychosocial and peer supports in each region, a partnership to respond to the critical incidents that we talked about, and then services of last resort that can work on the higher level of risk in environmental health before mainstream services can go into work with individuals. We've also recommended a workforce development plan, so training for mainstream staff as well as the specialist staff, a digital hoarding and squalor information hub, and of course testing any service design with older Tasmanians. So I'd like to welcome three wonderful guest speakers that we have today. We have Siobhan Marriott, who is an artist and is also a family member within a family with hoarding behaviour. We have Leslie King, who is the project manager at Tas Fire Service, and Rick Fulton, who's statewide manager for Housing Tasmania. So they're going to share some of their experiences with you. And then we'll open up for questions. Siobhan, can I welcome you?
Thank you. Is that okay if we don't share screen for my slides until the end? Is that okay? I just have some things I want to show on the camera. I don't think people will be able to see if I'm in a little thumbnail. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Hi, so I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. It is really heartening to see so many people interested and wanting and needing more information about hoarding. And I just feel, as you'll understand from Lindsay's presentation, that her research is really rigorous and thorough, but also based and rooted in compassion and dignity. So that's just, it's really great that the information that you're getting is from her. So my name's Siobhan Marriott, and I make art and write about hoarding disorder. So my journey to this point started when I was living overseas and was trying to find resources for my loved ones with hoarding behaviours, trying to help them long distance, which sometimes maybe can be better off than being in their face and in their space. And I found the book Buried in Treasures, which Lindsay might have to hold up because my copy is at the gallery on a shelf of all my hoarding resources. So this is the Bible, as far as I'm concerned, of helping people with hoarding behaviours. It's called Buried in Treasures, and it's by Tolan, Frost and Stickety. It took me about twice reading through that book, thinking I was helping my loved ones, to realise I too am a hoarder. So just speaking about insight and understanding, really, I got to about the age of 40 before realising I had it too. So some family members or loved ones or children of hoarders may go the other way into minimalism. I found that I really had carried on those behaviours myself, and that was something I was going to have to think about with managing my own home and my own children. And so that's probably also when I developed a lot more compassion for people with hoarding behaviours, when I realised that I was also doing it. So I have two main people in my family, one that has what is called insight into her hoarding, and again, for her particularly after reading the Buried in Treasures and sort of understanding the behaviours and the reasons and identifying those, and the other has no insight. He doesn't need to read the book because, it's not a problem. My loved one with insight entered into a Buried in Treasures program through Lifeline. So it's this is like a workbook of the work group program that can be like a 12 or 16 week work group. And that was in tandem with psychologist appointments with Lifeline in the Northern Sydney area. Now, she had to interview to even get into the program. The one that we tried to sign her up for was full. She waited another 6 months and interviewed for that. That tells you some of the level of demand just in the Northern Sydney area. And then she was able to do that course. One of the psychologists there let me know that there was a concurrent, at the same time as the individuals with hoarding met, there was like a carers meeting, and would I like to come to that? And I said, that's great, but you're in Sydney and I'm in Hobart. And she said, well, maybe you can just contact Lifeline and attend one of their carers meetings, even though you're long distance. So I contacted Lifeline down here, and they said, oh, we don't do that. And then I come to find that there's no dedicated government funded public hoarding specific resources or services in all of Tasmania. So that was quite frustrating for me, and I felt quite alone, both as a carer of 2 older hoarders long distance, and myself as a middle-aged hoarder. I understand that I'm not sort of the crisis emergency point, but I shouldn't have to get to that point before there's something there for me. And again, as the sandwich generation of caring for the older hoarders and having our own children, there's a lot of pressure trying not to perpetuate those behaviours into our children, and you can see it quite early in children sometimes. So I started making these question and affirmation cards. These are based on chapter 6 of Buried in Treasures, called How Did This Happen? This one is, am I having overly creative thoughts about this? And I see this in my family members and myself. Oh, I could turn that into an, oh, I could make that something out of that. Maybe you never do. And my affirmation for when I feel that way about it, something is, I am creative and clever. I affirm to myself, yes, I don't need to keep every single empty toilet roll, because I am creative and clever, but I don't have the appropriate time or space to do all of these things. So it's trying to bring things back into proportion. I made these cards for myself, and I started sharing those on my little personal Instagram page, and that didn't feel like enough. So I started making memes, and I was sharing these with my friends who obviously growing up with me had known my family and my behaviours. So this is Jack Nicholson saying, what could I use you for? And I would imagine myself as a hoarder sorting through my things, being very cutthroat about what I kept or what I got rid of. And you know, that was nice for a little while, but that still didn't seem to be enough. And so I started my own Instagram page, and I print my Instagram content as zines, what I call little booklets, little self-published books, as minimum 2. So you can find me minimum 2 on Instagram. And I do book reviews, mainly looking at resources, both hoarding resources, any kind of self-care or psychology resources, because it's very relatable. People might not understand hoarding, but they might understand anxiety or depression or any of the other reasons and concurrent, you know, issues that are going on for hoarders. Regular sorting and decluttering books, and debunking why they might not be helpful. You might have someone give the KonMari book to a hoarder, and that can actually be less helpful, because then they're already failing at doing the first step of being able to bring all their things together on their lounge room floor, because they can't access all their things and they don't have a lounge room floor. And then I have a sort of social justice chapter where I look at other issues in the world, environmentalism, racism, things like that, and how there can be these other issues that are impacting all of it, and that it's all happening under this bigger umbrella rather than just these individual cases of people descending into hoarding and squalor. So since then, since making that page, I've actually made contact with other children of hoarders and carers of hoarders. And there's a very small group of us who make art about it. To give you some concept of how far we've had to go to find community, and why, look, there's some ugly stuff in the hoarding hashtags on Instagram. It is not pretty. That's why I make my art pretty, to kind of subvert that and put pretty things in there, so people will hopefully come and find more information than just seeing stigmatizing imagery all the time. But, you know, they're in Sydney, Brisbane, New York and UK, and that's how far we have to go to find each other. And so that's one of the reasons why I use the social media, even though it's not always great, is because that's one of the only ways I can find other people like me. So we have a show on at Moona Art Centre at the moment. It's on till February 26th. That's Christy's work on the front there. We've got the cover, that was nice. Christy's in Sydney, and Tammy Law's in Brisbane. And that's until following week, Saturday, and we've done a cute little zine for that too, and Lindsay's written a little forward for us. So thank you very much, Lindsay, and thanks for this opportunity to talk to you all. Hope you get along to the show.
You need to unmute.
I was muted. Thank you so much, Siobhan. I highly recommend that you go and see Precious Excess at Moolah Arts Centre. It's thought-provoking and beautiful. And I've included in the slides links to the Precious Excess exhibition, and also an online discussion that the artists are having on Saturday that you can register for on Saturday the 26th, that you can register for. Thank you, Siobhan. I'm going to hand over to Leslie King now, who's going to share with you some exemplary practice we have here in Tasmania.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks to SARC for inviting me along to talk about this. And thank you, Siobhan, for sharing your lived experience. Yeah, so I'm here to just give you a bit of a perspective from an emergency services as a first responder, what it's like for first responder attending a property with hoarding on site, and what are the risks of the hazards as hoarding as a hazard. So a lot of this is probably it's sort of obvious, but that, you know, the accumulation of possessions result in quite a high fuel load, which means bigger fires and more toxic fires. So when we say bigger fires, means also the fact that those fires could impact dwellings or properties close by. Of course, there's greater opportunity for ignition of a fire when cooking and heating equipment have a lot of, you know, paper, fabrics, anything close by that heating equipment. Those, you know, blocking exits and narrower pathways impede anyone in that property to be able to escape. So yeah, they're most likely going to, you know, be a fatality or a serious injury in a fire when they can't escape quickly. And the fact that most properties would have a lack of smoke alarms or an inability to hear the smoke alarms because of all the possessions quite up high. There may be only one smoke alarm. It may be in a hallway somewhere and they may not actually hear it when it goes off. And the fact that often there is non-functional gas and electricity, any of those sort of utilities may not be properly maintained or serviced, and sort of see if anything is broken. Thanks, Lindsay. Next slide. So how this is a risk really for occupants and the neighbours, but it also is a huge work health and safety risk for our firefighters. So just to give you a bit of an explanation, when we get a 000 call to a fire at a property, they don't know what they're going to. They just know there's property. They don't know if there's people inside or outside or anything like that. So they pretty much, you know, prepare for the worst case scenario, but often they're not properly prepared for hoarding, as I mentioned, bigger fires. So, you know, they will take a truck with about 5 or 6 firefighters. When they get to the fire, you can see from their attack of a building, they pretty much stay low. The smoke and the heat is quite high up in the building and builds up and gets lower and lower. So their attack is quite low. You can see they have breathing apparatus on, you know, their helmets. That really restricts their movement. So they've got the cylinders on their back, quite a very heavy, big hose. So, you know, they're impeded by movement and by vision, the heat as well, and smoke. So it's quite difficult for them fighting a fire. So, you know, you can see there the ground and the area is quite clear. So you can imagine what it would be like for them to get into a fire with quite a lot of items, there's potential then for stacked items to fall on them, which we have had fatalities of firefighters from that, not in Tasmania, but there is that potential for items to fall on them and to destabilise their breathing gear and inhale that toxic smoke. When they go in, sorry, Lindsay, when they actually go in and do search and rescue, they move around a room. It's very dark, so they actually physically have to move around a room and crisscross to do search and rescue, because potentially someone is passed out, they don't know who's there, so they have to do search and rescue. So items, you know, someone may actually be under items and very difficult to find as well. So, you know, there is a huge risk to our firefighters. Bigger fires, more toxic fires, and very complex situation, slips, trips and falls, and those sorts of things as well. Thank you, Lindsay. Now we can have the next slide. Thank you. So as a response to the risks of our firefighters in households that have hoarding, we've set up a hazard notification system. And this basically is a discrete alert. So if we get notified of a hoarding at a property, all we need to know is the address and the hazard. So we have had other hazards on there as well, but about 95% of hazards are hoarding hazards on our system. That discrete alert goes on in our computer dispatch system, so that when there's a 000 call to that property, an alert pops up and our Firecom then can tell the firefighters hoarding hazard has been identified at this property, and what they will do then is probably take an extra truck so that they can pretty much have each other's support and attack that fire very quickly. The idea is to confine fires to the room of origin so we don't have bigger fires. We use the clutter image rating scale, which is an international scale for the eligibility. And the aim is for firefighter preparedness and also community safety. With the permission of the occupant, there's also the ability that you can arrange a home fire safety check, which I can help support people with that. But of course, the occupant has to agree to having a home fire safety check, but they don't have to necessarily have to give their permission to be on the notification system, because we're not collecting personal information. As part of the system, there's an info pack, the clutter image rating scales in the information pack, but there's also a fact sheet about fire risk reduction for, you know, for that household that has hoarding on site. We recommend the installation of smoke alarms that are interconnected. So that means that if one goes off, they all go off. And you notice where I've put there in a living area, but rooms where people sleep. Like you see the banner behind me, we say install a smoke alarm in every bedroom, but in houses where there's hoarding present, many people actually don't use their beds anymore, as Lindsay described, that, you know, their living arrangements become quite compromised by the amount of hoarding. They usually sleep on a couch or on a chair. So whatever room that is that they do their sleeping, smoke alarm should be in that room. Most of our fires happen at night. So assist them and explain to them, you know, that it's really important to unblock exits so that they can evacuate quickly, but also emergency services that can get in and help them evacuate or rescue them. So, you know, widening internal pathways. So harm minimisation is the first point of call. We're not saying get rid of it, all your stuff. It's just about, you know, ordering it so that there's safety, and harm minimisation is a priority. Making sure utilities are checked, gas connections, electricity, heat pumps. I went to one hoarding household that had hoarding of firewood inside the living room. They were still using a wood fire. So things like that really need to be addressed to minimise the risk. So prioritise minimising and removing clutter around cooking areas and where there's heaters and electrical items, you know, like you see in the image there, oil fryers, toasters, those sorts of things should really have gaps around them. And please discourage the use of open flame. So I'm available to provide those home fire safety training as well as home fire safety checks, and if you have any concerns about the fire risk of a client or a consumer, just contact me. I'll put my details in the chat. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Leslie. I'll remind everybody that all there's time for questions afterwards. We'll make time for questions afterwards. I'd like to hand over now to Rick Fulton, who is the State Manager Housing in Tasmania.
Hi guys, thanks Lindsay. Pleasure to be with you. As a landlord and as a social housing landlord, we have a varied response, I suppose, to hoarding. On one side, we are a tenancy manager, and we do need to safeguard the asset that we're given for the people. So in that sense, hoarding is a major risk for those individuals. Noting that hoarding in of itself is not a breach of the lease. It is what comes out of hoarding, and particularly squalor, that will put clients at risk. So that is our focus when we're looking at this. So we're not looking at taking away people's stuff. We're looking at saying, well, how can we make this safe? Our other focus, and when I say safe, I mean including safe for the individual, not just for the asset. Our other focus, being a social housing landlord, is actually on tenant support. So part of our role is to actually support individuals with their health needs, their personal support needs. And clearly in a lot of cases, hoarding is related to mental health issues, and therefore it is part of our role to assist them to actually achieve some improvement or resolution of those mental health issues as well. So particularly as the hoarding itself is often just a symptom of a larger or more complex mental health issue rather than being the issue itself. We also have a community responsibility as well. Squalor and fire risk, of course, is not just a risk to that individual, particularly in unit complexes, but so that it is a risk to the general community and others that are co-located with those individuals. So we've got a duty of care there as well. So what we're trying to do with hoarding and how do we assist with it is multifaceted and changing and improving all the time. But one of the things we have done, and you can see up on your screen now the a clutter image rating scale. What one of our tenancy intervention officers, Brian Wilson, actually did was take this, what is an international scale, and adopt it and adapt it for use in tenancy work. So what it does is it links for our staff in a couple of ways. One is that when they're going to talk to an individual, they have these pictures there, and they can talk to them in the sense of, can you identify at what level your hoarding is at? Where do you think you are on this? Then we can relate that back to what needs to be done, which is a much more positive way of actually interacting with someone than coming in and saying, bad person, haven't done well. They can actually see what they've done and the risk that actually entails. The other thing it does for our staff is ensures that each member of our staff is actually not applying their own personal value system to what they're seeing. They're actually bringing it back against a scale, which I think is really important. We actually did some work before we use this system of trying to understand individuals, our work individuals, and they rated people very differently. So one person to another gave a very different rating. Therefore, the client got a very different response. And so part of this is trying to ensure that we give a reasoned and appropriate response to each individual. And the other thing it does for us is we've linked it back to our policies and procedures. So when should we be giving someone to one of our tenancy support persons to actually assist? When should we be looking at other things in terms of breach of lease and so on? So about consistency of practice across those things. Now, I've talked about our tenancy intervention officer and tenancy support person. So we have one in the north and one in the south, and we're currently going through a process where we're looking at developing a tenancy support practice framework. We hope out of that we'll actually get more support workers going forward. So what they are not tenancy officers, so they're not involved in the management of the tenancy. They're there for the support of the individuals. So what we'll be doing is identifying those individuals who have support needs, and we're looking to have a whole of tenancy life support system built in. That is, they'll have a tenancy support person engage with them as they enter into housing and continue to support them whilst they're in tenancy services. So this enables a relationship to be built where this is a person they can go to and seek support and assistance in maintaining their property. When I say that, maintaining their tenancy, not the physical maintenance of the property. So there's people there to support, and so hopefully within this year we'll have those additional workers. In the meantime, we still do have tenancy intervention officers, as I call it at the moment, who, where a tenancy is at risk, step in and work with the individuals to try and build a bridge between them and services so that the person can get support. What we've found is our biggest limiting factor is where we have people who have diagnosed mental illnesses that is the root cause of their hoarding, that we cannot get them the psychological services that they actually need to break this cycle. So what we're tending to find is we may, because of the risk of loss of tenancy, we may get these people to actually comply for short periods of time to get rid of some stuff. We just turn around and we're back there in a short period of time. Now, we do go through this process of doing it because at this point it's all we've got, and better to actually have some success for a period of time. And we have had some success on that side. We have much more success where it's what we call a learned hoarding behaviour. That is, it's generational. It's how these people have learnt to live over time. There we can get training for them, support for them to actually live what is deemed by us a more appropriate life. So it's protecting the asset and so on, and not putting their tenancy at risk. We have a lot more success at the moment on that side, but where we need psychosocial services, they just, as has been said before, do not exist in any real sense or form in this state. And it's something, and while I'm here today supporting what Lindsay's doing, because we see it as highly important moving forward to actually build a community of support network, but also to put pressure on government to actually provide us with other services for this, what is now probably our highest or most significant tenancy risk we face. So, and it's also the hardest to deal with. Someone not paying the rent is a relatively easy thing to deal with in most cases, but when we're talking mental health and what are major things to overcome, when you get a house that's at a level, probably 6 and up on that clutter rating, to actually turn that around when we're talking the whole house and the yard, is a significant physical exercise, as well as the mental exercise of getting the person where they're comfortable to actually allow that to happen and then continue on with it after. So, as I say, tenancy services is very supportive of what's going on here, and in particular the groups that will hopefully come out of this at the end. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Rick. This was fantastic. And to let you all know, in the slides that you'll receive after the session, we've included the clutter image rating scale that both Leslie and Rick referred to, and another scale that's often used, the environmental cleanliness and clutter scale, along with other assessment tools that are common in this space too. So you'll get that as part of your post-session pack. I want to give a really big thank you to all of you for attending today. It's fantastic to see so much commitment and experience come together around this issue. I want to give a really big thank you to our wonderful guest speakers today, Siobhan, Leslie and Rick, who have been really generous in sharing their time and their knowledge and their thoughts in this space. You will get the slide deck following this, so that has all the links and the details that we've talked about today. And the Treasured Lives website, which is also hyperlinked on the slides, provides lots of resources that hopefully you're finding useful to support your work. We'll be in touch again about a network, so we do hope to hear from you again very soon. So go well and have a good day, and hopefully we will see you again later in the year. Thank you very much. It's time to close the session. Thank you.